We are in the book of Acts, and we're talking about the conversion of Lydia. Now, I know that not everyone here is a Bible scholar or familiar with this story, but let me try to cut to the chase. It's about divine appointments. Have you ever had a divine appointment or something that you felt was a divine appointment in your life that you look back and the circumstances were so orchestrated in such a way that you realized it was of God? I've had that. I've shared this story in the past, but I was talking to someone the other day and they hadn't heard it, so I wanted to share it with you, probably about the greatest divine appointment I've ever had in my life. In the fall of 2004, I was pastoring in the city of Chicago, and I had felt for some time that God leading us on to go to get further education. And I felt that God was leading me to go to a school in New England called Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And right before I left, I announced to the church that we would be leaving and moving on, but we had a financial need. I was a church in the city, and doing ministry in the city is an expensive endeavor, and I wasn't paid a whole lot, and I didn't know how God was going to supply this, so I kind of presented to the church, and got ready to move to New England in January. And it was great when I got home one day, right before I was getting ready to go visit Melissa's family in Florida. I checked the mail, and there was an envelope in there addressed to me. It had a stamp on there that I didn't know what town it came from. But I opened it up, and I was blown away that there was a money order, a check for $1,500 in there. It didn't say who it was from. It didn't say anything else. It just said $1,500 to Travis Fleming, and I thought, awesome, like God is providing my needs. This is the show that I'm doing the right thing. But I put it on the table and left as quickly as I could so we could catch this plane that we were going to see Melissa's family. And when we got back from Florida, the time was short for us to pack up our stuff and move, so we packed up our stuff and got in the moving truck and started driving to New England. And I said to my wife, what'd you do with the check? And she's like, I thought you had it. And I thought, that's not good when we can't find this check of $1,500. So we said, well, we must have packed it away. So we get all the way to New England, we start unpacking our stuff, and we can't find it. We keep looking, and we can't find it anywhere. And I come to the realization, she's like, well, it was on the table. What did you do with the paper on the table? And I said, I thought it was trash. So I ended up throwing away $1,500 check. Now, God had supplied my needs in spite of that, but every time that I would actually call back to my church in Chicago going, hey, whoever gave us this check, thanks a lot. We lost it. Can you write another one? It was anonymous. We had no idea who it was from. And we really needed those funds as we were getting adjusted to England, but God was gracious and supplied our needs. And every time, though, I would think about it, I just felt this huge frustration come up within me going, I felt like I had just spit in God's face, like I had lost this blessing that he'd given to me and I didn't take advantage of it, and it really frustrated me. Well, 2.5 years went by, finished the education, and felt God leading on for further schooling at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Deerfield, Illinois. So once again, packed up our stuff, moved to Deerfield, and within the first few months, I realized that living in Deerfield was very, very expensive, or we were living in Grays Lake, but it was very expensive, and we ran out of money quick. And I was pretty desperate need. And it was going down very, very quickly, and I thought, what are we going to do? And that was just in the back of my mind, but we were also at the same time trying to find a church to attend and serve at. And so a friend of mine suggested a church that was about 20 minutes to the north of where we were living. So we decided to go to service that Sunday. And that's a big deal. If you ever showed up at church and you've never been to a church before, it's kind of intimidating, right? You don't know where to go. You don't know what to do. You don't know what people are going to be dressed like. What am I going to do with my kids? And at the time, I had 2 children. And so to keep my kids' attention, we brought some markers along as well. Well, we walk into the sanctuary, and it's got really wood floors. It's a big church, and we walk in late, and the usher comes and takes and sits us down and puts us near the back, which was very grateful for. And the pastor was praying, and we're trying to just get our kids adjusted really quick so that they don't make a lot of noise. When my daughter opens up her markers and hits the floor, it makes this huge booming echo, causing everyone in the church to turn around and look at us. One of my best moments as a parent, right there. And I remember, though, one guy right in front of me turned and he looked at me, and I thought, man, he looks really familiar to me. I think I've seen him someplace before. Didn't think much about it. A couple weeks went by. Money dwindled down to where it was nothing. And we had $0. And I had my rent due. And living where this was, it was extremely expensive where we were living. And it was about $1,450 for rent. I mean, this is right before the economy tanked. Everything was very expensive. And it was a lot of money. And I had no money at all. And the rent was due on the following Monday, and here it was Tuesday, and I'm thinking going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I come home on Wednesday night from my class, and my wife hands me this letter, and we're going to go look at Christmas lights. And I open up this letter, and it says this: Dear Travis, in the fall of 2004, I found myself at a church in the inner city of Chicago. And I heard about this young pastor who was a Moody graduate, if I believe, and I remember correctly, who was going on and felt the call of God to go out to New England to go to school. And God told me that I was to help him financially. So I went to a bank in Lake Villa on Route 83, and I got a money order. I can't even remember how much it was for, but after I got the money order, I got in my car, and I got ready to mail it to you when I started having chest pains. He was having a heart attack. And so he realized that he's going to die. He said, I turn and I look to the seat next to me, and I see this envelope, and I say to God, God, you told me to help this young man, but I'm going to die. And he goes, you're not going to die today. Mail the check. It's going to be all right. So he gets up out of his car, goes to the mailbox as he's having a heart attack, mails it. He'd already called an ambulance. He hits the ground. He's crawling on his arms. When he sees the ambulance go by, they come back, pick him up. They do tests on him. They said, you're going to die today. You have what's called the widowmaker. Would you like us to call a priest or a pastor? And he says, God told me I'm not going to die today. Do whatever you need to do. And so what happened then was, he said, it's 2.5 years later, and I have half a heart, but imagine my surprise when that young pastor that I helped a few years ago, I see a far cry from Boston. You wouldn't know me if I stood in front of your face. He said, but I saw you, and God told me to write you this letter. Maybe it helps you, maybe it doesn't. Sincerely, a brother in Christ. Now, you think I'd be encouraged by that letter, but it was just a reminder to me that I lost $1,500. And so that night when we went looking at Christmas lights, I was not a happy camper. My wife is like, look how beautiful the lights are. I hate the lights. I hate Christmas. I hate everything right now. I need $1,500. And so the next day I got up and I spent some time with the Lord. I opened my Bible and I was reading, but the Holy Spirit kept bringing some details of that letter to my mind. Route 83, Lake Villa. Route 83, Lake Villa. Now, if you would have told me the 3 years before that Lake Villa or Route 83, I wouldn't have known anything that you were talking about because I'd been living in Chicago. But now, when I was living in Grays Lake, I knew these signposts. And I was desperate, so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I grabbed the letter, grabbed my keys, saw my wife, and said, honey, I'm going to get on Route 83 in Lake Villa, and I'm going to pull over at a bank, and I'm going to walk in with this letter, and I'm going to see what God does. And she's like, go for it. What other option do we have? So I grab the letter, get in my car, driving. I get on 83, and I see literally the sign for Lake Villa, and the first building is a bank. It's brand new. I pull in thinking, they probably won't be able to help me. But I walk in with this letter, and I tell them the story. I said, I got a money order a few years ago. I don't even know if it's good anymore. I said, I know a check is only good for so many months. They said, well, a money order is good for 6 years. And I thought, bonus. I said, I don't even know if it's this bank or not, and I don't have, I don't know who it was from. And they said, well, they may not be our bank. We're only a few years old. It's probably another one. And I said, well, how many banks are on Route 83 in Lake Villa? She goes, 8. I said, well, I got nothing else to do, and I need money. So I'm going to go to every bank that there is. But I said, at first, I told him my story, and she goes, well, let me put you in touch with a senior associate. So they put me with this woman, and I shared my story, and I'm telling her, I'm trying to show her that I'm not a criminal, I'm not trying to take advantage of anything, and she sits me down, and she interviews me. She goes, well, who is this check to? I said, it's to me. She goes, who's it from? I said, no clue. She said, how much is it for? I said, I think it's $1,500. I only saw it once right before I got on the plane. I said, it could be $1,450. I'm sure it's $1,500. She goes, you're sure it's not more than that? I said, I'm sure. She goes, well, I doubt if it's us, but let me look through our records to see any unclaimed checks. So she fiddles around, she's scrolling on the computer, and then her eyes grow as big as saucers. And she says, oh my gosh, we have the check. I sat and I cried in the middle of that bank. How can you tell me that I would go from Chicago and I'd have a guy come into the service and hear about a need and write a check, and then I would lose that check, and he never knew that I lost it because it's a money order. He never knew I lost that check. And then I would move all the way to New England, and then I would move back, and then I would be in that church that day, and that guy that turned around was that guy. And God told him to write that check to me. Or no, write that letter. And he included details. He didn't even know that he would include it because God did it. And I'm saying is that there are moments in our lives where God shows that he's behind it. That it's not coincidence. That it's he has orchestrated those moments in time to show forth his power and his glory in our lives. And God's doing this. He doesn't get exhausted doing it. He's not worn out doing it. He's not busy. He's never too busy. He's not confused. He doesn't get people mixed up. He knows it all at that time, and he shows himself in the lives of his people time and time again. That's what God does. And it's awesome. And today we're coming upon a moment where there was a woman who had a divine appointment with God, but she didn't know it. That God had orchestrated the circumstances of her life and Paul and Silas to collide at this moment in time where she would go forth changed forever. Now today, I want us to pause for a moment and ask God in our own hearts and times how this could be our divine appointment today, that how he might show himself to us and then use us to show his name to others. Because God's in the business of using all kinds of people. He's not limited by your education or your bank account. He's not limited by your abilities or inabilities. That he can transform and use anybody and show his power in their lives. Let's take a moment to pray and ask God to bless our message time, shall we? Heavenly Father, we consider how you interact in the lives of your people as you're working out your mission in the world and you're using us to do it. Lord, as we see this conversion of Lydia, may we see the divine appointments that are all around us and how we can be a part of your divine appointments to others. So Lord, bless us, speak to us, and use us today. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're in Acts chapter 16, and I want to walk through this passage. It's a small passage, but it packs a big punch. And I want to just draw out what's been going on. And we have the stage set for us a little bit. We remember, if you remember the story, Paul, who is the great new missionary and propagator of the faith, preacher that God called him to go out and share this new message with the world. And that he had gone on some different missionary journeys, and now he is partnered with a guy named Silas, and they are going off to share the truth of who Jesus is. And they set sail from Troas, and they made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and these are places that we aren't familiar with, but Troas is a coastal city that's on the west coast of what is now Turkey. And they went north to this island of Samothrace, and then to the city called Neapolis, which is in the region of Thrace. Again, places that we don't know today, but that's in southern Macedonia, right around Greece. And then they went to Philippi, which was a very influential city in the district of Macedonia, and it bared the designation of a Roman colony, which meant if you were a Roman citizen, you got rights and privileges that came with being a Roman citizen. If you're an American citizen, you get rights and privileges for being an American citizen. And in this world, if you were a Roman citizen, you had the most powerful passport around. You could get into a lot of different things. You had a lot of opportunities. People really respected that. So we have this Roman, the city that's also a Roman colony. And they decided to stay there for some days. And in verse 13, we read that on the Sabbath day, which was Saturday, actually Sabbath day, Saturday, and Sunday. Saturday was often the Sabbath day, but after the resurrection of Christ, Sunday was often referred to as the Sabbath day. And they went outside the gate to the riverside where there was supposed to be a place of prayer. Now, before I delve into that, I want to stop for a moment to get our bearings before we go into the details of this divine appointment. I want us to see that Paul's desire was to minister to people. And I want us to see that this divine appointment involves, and it seems simple, but in our society today, it's pretty tough, connecting with people. It involves connecting with people. That's number one within your notes if you're following along with me, that it means connecting with people. If we are doing and trying to fulfill this divine appointment, we need to want to connect with people. We need to seek out people. And I know some people are saying, well, I'm an introvert and I don't do that very well. I don't know what I'm going to say, or I'm afraid of making a mistake. I mean, we are paralyzed by fear. And God's not calling you to be Paul per se. He's calling you to be you. But in that, he's calling you to trust him and walk by faith. And put yourself out there and connect with people. And not just online, but really connect with people. That was Paul's desire, and it needs to be ours as well. We need to connect with people. And in our culture, that means slowing down, putting our phones down, and simplifying our lives so we can connect with people. Now, notice their strategy here for a moment was for them to be going to the cities. Now, this might seem like a silly point for those that are living in a city, but it should give us hope to know that God is trying to reach the cities. The whole book of Genesis begins in a garden, but the book of Revelation ends in a city. His desire is to reach cities that for the glory of his name. Now, it's not that God's against small towns. I'm from a small town, but it's that there are more people made in his image per square inch than anywhere else in the world in this city. And it's amazing to see what God is doing now and how cities are growing in our world. In fact, now 5 million people per month move into cities all over the world. That's like 2 new Chicagos per month. God has a plan for the cities, and he's been orchestrating the move into the cities for some time. For example, in the year 1800, there were 40 cities in the world with a population of 100,000 or more. And by 2025, that's expected to be 6,500. That's a lot of people. In the year 1800, the world had a population of 903 million with an urban population of 36 million, which means that 867 million people, or 96% of the world's population, lived in a farm area. But in 2018, now there are 7.5 billion people in the world, and 3.5 billion live in urban centers. That means almost 50% of the world's population is now living in an urban center, and all of this happened in 200 years. In the year 1800, there was what we call a megacity with a population over 1 million. But right now, there are 480 cities in the world with a population over 1 million, with it projected to be 650 cities by the year 2025. So in 7 years, you're going to see a mass growth of the cities. People are moving into the cities. So Paul is going to where the people are. And we're in this community and have the ability now to affect the world and share with the world the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. Because in our city, we have the nations here. That's it. We have a lot of different cultures, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different people coming in. And some of you who have grown up in this community look around and go, who moved to my city? It's gotten so diverse, it's so different. And that's awesome because that means that God has brought the nations to be able to hear about who Jesus is. Now, Paul made his way through the various cities and he stops in Philippi, which is a leading city in the district of Macedonia in a Roman colony. It's a very influential city, but it's not Jewish. So Paul often started his ministry after finding out where Jews were meeting. He's trying to find a connecting point. And since the city didn't boast a very large Jewish population, and he couldn't find a synagogue, it was the common practice then for Jews to gather at the riverside outside the gate to pray. Because for a community to have a Jewish synagogue, there had to be at least 10 Jewish men, which explains that they didn't have one yet, because here we can see that only women were gathered and no men were present. They were fearers of God. They were wanting to learn more about the God of Israel. They were converts probably to Judaism, or they were Jews themselves. And Paul, being a Roman citizen and a zealous Jewish scholar, knew what the people would be. He knew the culture he was ministering in. He knew how things were done. And we can see that if we're to connect with people, it requires knowing the culture we live in. Knowing the culture we live in. Again, I understand that we talk about culture a lot in here, but it really involves a lot because understanding how to navigate our culture. We have to understand how to navigate our culture. I was talking with some friends of mine, Nathan and Jenny Fawbush. I went to Trinity with them, with Nathan, and they are doing a church plant among refugees in Berlin, which is pretty amazing because if you remember, Germany took in 1 million immigrants. Refugees, 1 million. The most we've ever had in our country is 100,000. They took in 1 million. It's incredible to think about. And so they wanted to do church planting among them. And so they came and were doing some fundraising before they went off to Berlin. And we're talking with them and sharing with them. And we're talking about cultures and all the different cultures that are coming together. And his I think she was maybe 7 or 8 years old, maybe a little older. His daughter walked through and she's listening to us for a minute. And she stops and interrupts the conversation and goes, "Culture, culture, culture. I'm so tired of hearing about culture." And walked out of the room. And I thought, but it's everything. Culture's everything. We don't even realize it. It's the air that we breathe, how we think, how we do things. And we have to think about the culture that we're living in and we want to minister to. The people around us, where they come from, what their background is, to understand, to walk a mile in their shoes, to understand where they come from. Don't you want someone to understand you? Your background, how you do things, what your family background is, your history, foods that you love, holidays, meaningful moments to you. You want people to enter into your world. And part of sharing Jesus is entering into their world and knowing how to navigate. And Paul knew that this group would be probably there. That's where they were supposing that they would be. Now, here's the point, though, that the last point of this first point here, for us to really do this and to connect with people, it takes something that we all need, and that's courage. It requires us being courageous. It means taking a risk. Taking a risk. When's the last time you took a risk for your faith? We're to walk by faith, not by sight. Which means that we are part of being a follower of Christ is putting ourselves out there in situations where we don't know how they're going to end or work out. And Paul puts himself out there to talk to these different women. Now, he knew how to interact and minister, but for those of us who've never done this before, it takes courage to do this. I remember reading about a church recently where they said it's time for testimonies, and they had a woman come up and she shared how she had shared her faith with someone from a different faith, and she was rejected. I mean, really badly rejected. And then I thought, what a weird testimony. What's the praise in this? Well, she sat down, and then the whole church applauded her. And there was a guy who was visiting the church that Sunday who was a friend of the pastor, and he said, I got to ask him the question afterwards, why were you applauding when the story didn't come out well? The guy rejected her, and she felt put down and ostracized. And he said, we applauded her because she was being courageous. She took a risk, and we're going to applaud people taking a risk. And I think we need to do that. If you're taking a risk to share your faith, we want to applaud that. Whether it ended well or it ended badly, you took a risk. You put yourself out there. That's awesome. That's what God's called us to do, to take a risk. What risk have you taken for your faith recently? Following Jesus means taking a risk. Taking up your cross means dying to yourself, but that's a risk. Putting yourself out there, sharing Jesus is a risk because people might reject you and they might say evil things about you. You could lose your job. You could lose income. You could be put outside of your family, but it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk. Because we don't know how God's going to work until we take the risk. And what we can see here is that the risk was completely worth it because God worked when he put himself out there. So these guys sit down and began to speak to the women that were there. And one woman, she's a businesswoman from the city of Thyatira. She was a God-fearer, which meant she was a convert to Judaism. She didn't practice all of necessarily the dietary laws. But she was listening to all that Paul was saying, and she is converted. She believes that truth. She's changing allegiances. That's what conversion means. It's changing allegiances from what we did love and value to Christ and what he loves and values and following him. And I like this passage because it gives us a small glimpse into how conversion happens. How conversion happens. Here we see how someone is transformed. I mean, what does it mean to be a follower of Christ? What does conversion look like? Does it mean you have to be perfect? Or does it mean that you have to clean up your life before you follow Jesus? What does it mean for your family, for your parents, for your children, for your job, for your extended family, your friends, your neighbors, your business associates? Let's look. First of all, before we actually get to the conversion, I want us to caution for a moment that we don't rely on what can be seen. Before we talk about how conversion happens, I want us to see and not rely on what can be seen. That's the letter A there within your notes. Because if you're just looking at the outward, you can psych yourself out before you ever get a chance. Have you ever done that where you think, they're not going to want to hear it. I heard them talking. I mean, Paul might look at her and go, she's pretty wealthy. It looks like she's got some money. I mean, she's a businesswoman. She's a woman of influence. We see in just a moment how her household believes, which means her servants as well as her family. She's a woman of some means. Purple, she's as we see within our text as we're going through this, that it says, she was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods who was a worshiper of God. Purple goods, especially in that time, to be able to get things dyed. Purple is a very valuable color. People wanted it. She was probably a very affluent lady. And she's a businesswoman. And so she hears this, and Paul could say from the outside, okay, this woman already converted to Judaism. What's going to make her to convert to this? Or she may not be interested in what I have to say. She might reject it. He's not looking at the outward. He's just sharing what he's supposed to share. And see, what we think, and we see people, and we label them in our minds really quick, and we think they're not going to want to hear it. Sometimes we think that we want to reach people that look and sound like us. But God is preparing the hearts and minds of all kinds of people, from all different kinds of backgrounds. Some that you might think are so far away from God, and they're the ones that are most close. And the ones that you think are the closest oftentimes are the ones that are most far away. You don't know who's going to share or receive what who Christ is. So we don't want to rely on what's on the outside, because that means nothing. Didn't God say to Samuel when he saw Jesse's sons and how strong and handsome they were when he was going to select the next king in Israel? He thought each one, by looks alone, looked like they were bound to be king. We'd say in our culture, he looks presidential. He sounds presidential. He's got the personality of someone that should be president. He's got the charisma. He's got that presidential oomph. And God says, no. God doesn't look at the outward. He looks at the heart. He looks at the heart. So let's not rely on what's been seen. And this woman, she had religion, but she didn't have Jesus. She had family, but she wasn't settled. She had riches, but wasn't satisfied. For us, we have to ask ourselves, as we're looking at her conversion, we have to ask ourselves, am I really converted? There are some people that have religion, but no peace. They have a great portfolio and no peace. They have great success, but not satisfaction. They have status, but no true security. Don't look at what's on the outside. That means nothing. Don't look at the people around you and think that they don't want Jesus. Someone is ready to respond that you think ordinarily wouldn't. Prostitutes, drug addicts, the self-righteous, bullies, those lost in all kinds of sexual immorality, those who are most moral and wealthy. We don't know who's going to respond, but we know that we are to share the truth of Jesus. And that's what we have to remind ourselves. Our job is to share truth. To share truth. We don't know exactly what Paul said. We know that they were talking to them. Truth is foundational to everything else, and a strong relationship must be built on truth. We have the greatest truth in the history of the world, and that's this. Jesus Christ came to save sinners. That he's the true king of the world, and he has declared forgiveness for all of those who have rebelled against him by engaging in all kinds of sins. And this ceasefire happened because of his sacrifice on the cross, enabled atonement to happen. And his resurrection from the dead confirmed that God the Father had received his sacrifice. And he ascended into heaven, where he waits for the day when he will enter into the fullness of his kingdom. This is the gospel we preach. We don't share morality. We don't share a Christian subculture. We share Jesus Christ and him crucified. It's the simple gospel that has been proclaimed for millennia, and it's still the same old gospel that saves, regardless of background, regardless of culture. And in our world of fake news and perspectives, it's nice to know there is still a truth that gives life and real hope. And we share it. We can't make anyone believe it. Only God's Spirit can do that. Only God's Spirit can confirm the truth of who he is in a person's heart, and they need to respond to that. That's what happens in verse 14. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was being said by Paul. Now, what's the operative term here, the operative person? It's the Lord. How did he open her heart? In John 6:63, Jesus said this. He said, it's the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is of no help at all. It's the Spirit who gives life. Flesh is no help at all. It's the Spirit who illuminates a person, who changes them, who transforms them. So we have to rely on the Spirit of God to work. We read more about this in 1 John chapter 5, verse 6. And Jesus Christ was revealed as God's Son by his baptism in water and by shedding his blood on the cross, not by water only, but by water and blood. And the Spirit, who is truth, confirms it with his testimony. See, it's the Spirit who opened her heart to pay attention to what was being said by Paul. He was to present it. It was God who opened her heart. And we have to listen to the Spirit when he speaks to us and when he shows us things. We're in danger if we don't. We need to pray and ask God by his Spirit to convict the hearts and minds of the unbelievers around us, that they may hear the message of Jesus and respond to him. The question is, are we listening to the Spirit of God? Are we asking God by his Spirit to work and transform hearts and minds? See, notice that this woman, Lydia, believed and her life was changed. And through this, we get a glimpse of what a changed life looks like. What a changed life looks like. When someone believes in Jesus, there's a change. They become a new creation. The old passed away, the new has come. They're no longer slaves to sin, now they're slaves to righteousness. They want to do what God wants them to do. Are you a changed person because of Jesus being in you? And if he is in you, then you are changed. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about the personal lives of our politicians in the news, especially in regards to the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. And I had an old friend of mine come out, and we were sharing and talking about politics, and she made a comment that really made me stop. She said, regardless of what happened, she goes, it could have happened, it could have not happened, I don't know. She said, I don't know what happened with him. She goes, what I do know and what really bothers me, she said, is that this is something that he did when he was a young man, and it makes it think that none of us can ever change, that there's no hope. No matter what we've ever done in our life, we'll always be defined by that one bad thing. That doesn't give me a lot of hope. Now, I'm not saying there shouldn't be justice. There should be justice, regardless of time. But I do wonder, and she made another comment. She said, each one of us has done something in our past that we're not proud of. And I thought, that's a lot of wisdom. I'd rather not be defined by my issues and my struggles and my things that I've done in my past. I'm not saying, again, that there shouldn't be justice for a person, and that needs to be met out. What I am saying is that if we've had issues in our own life, I hope that we can find forgiveness and a new life and the hope that we can become a new creation through Christ. That there is hope of real change. Because if there's not real hope and real change, then there's nobody that could ever run for office ever. Ever. There's no perfect people out there. But she was changed. Now, Lydia was changed, and we can see that by looking at verse 15. After she was baptized. She was baptized immediately after she believed. She didn't wait on anyone. She didn't wait on her family. She did it herself. And then they followed. She was baptized in her whole household. And there are some, and I've met some in our own fellowship, who are placing baptism on hold because they're waiting on someone else to come to faith so they can get baptized together. I'm going to use an English term. That's balderdash and poppycock. I have a lot of other words I would use. That's bogus. You don't wait on someone else for your obedience. You be obedient now. That's what God has called us to do. Not wait on someone else, not wait on your husband, not wait on your wife, not wait on your kids. You are called to go and be baptized. It's an immediate command, not to wait around until you feel like it one day. It's the sign that I am following Christ. And there are some that say, well, I want to get my life straight first. You don't understand the gospel. You don't get your life cleaned up and then come to Jesus. You come to Jesus and he cleans you up. You come broken. Some of us are so stupid proud. We're just dumb. We think that we have all this, we're going to get it all together. You got to come and be obedient. That's what he's called us to do. That's a changed life. And we obey what we know. And she knew that she had to be baptized. And that's part of a changed life, is you obey what we know. And I love this new movement that's coming out right now among different mission groups. It's called obedience-based discipleship. I like to call that the Bible. And is that you're supposed to do what God calls you to do, and people wait around and they don't obey. Why do you think, you want to know why God hasn't shown anything in your life? Because you haven't obeyed in what he has showed you. And yet we think that God's going to just pour out this blessing and we're never going to give any obedience. He's not going to bless until you obey. That's the principle. You have to obey what we know, not what you don't know, what you do know. And there's something that God has placed on your heart that you know you need to obey. It might be quitting your job. It might be leaving that relationship. It might be staying in that relationship. It might be leaving that sin behind and holding on to that. Or whatever it might be that God is showing you. What is God called you to do? And you need to obey what you know. What he has called you to do. And what is it he's called you to do? How is that changed life to be worked out in you? And when you obey what you know, what happens is that this new life, this changed life, overflows to the people around you. It can't be kept in. Look at verse 15 again. And after she was baptized, and her whole household as well. She didn't wait for anyone else to be baptized. She was, but it overflowed to her family and her servants and those working for her. And her faith overflowed to the point that her whole household believed too. Whether it was her children, her servants who were traveling with her or staying with her in that community, we don't know. We just know that they followed her example. Let your life be a good challenge to your family. Don't wait on them. Set the tone. Be the thermostat, not the thermometer. You set the tone and watch them follow. The same is true at your work or school or in your neighborhood. Let what is in you overflow to others. We share what we enjoy and it flows out of us. My daughter had seen this really funny meme this past week and wanted to show it to me because of how much it made her laugh. It overflowed from her. My question is does our faith overflow more than that? We seem more excited about the latest YouTube video than we are about the Savior of the world. Her household believed, and she then urged Paul and Silas to come and stay at her home. She urged. Now, the Greek word that's used there means to beg, entreat, beseech. She was persuasive and she was pressing upon them. She wanted to share her new life with others, and that involved opening her home to them. See, that's another hallmark of a changed life when we're offering up what we have. We're offering up what we have. It might be money. If it's money, then offer money. If it's your home, dorm room, apartment, clothing, food, talents, or time, we're to offer up to God whatever we have for his service. Don't be ashamed. She wanted to offer up her home, her food, her resources to these men, that they would be able to have a home base, some rest, refreshment, encouragement to take this message further. What have you offered up to Jesus? You may think it's small, but in God's hands it's big. One of my favorite stories in Scripture comes from John chapter 6, and it's commonly referred to as the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus is by the Sea of Galilee healing people, and a large crowd started following him, and he wanted to feed them, and at the same time wanted to test the faith of one of his disciples, one of the guys by the name of Philip. So he asked them how he would be able to buy bread to feed so many people. Philip responded that it was an impossible task because it would take a ton of money and it would take over years to earn. But the fascinating part of the passage comes when Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, shows up and he tells Jesus in John 6:9, he says this. I love this passage. He says, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2